Neotanks. These weird bull-shaped vehicles were introduced in Advanced Wars 2 and are categorized as the strongest ground units you can deploy. And they were, at least until the Megatank was introduced in Dual Strike. In fact, Neotanks were so strong that in order to deploy them in the campaign, you had to complete secret lab missions to obtain the blueprints to build them. So that naturally means they should be the strongest units you could possibly buy, right? Well, the question I'll be answering in this video is, are Neotanks actually worth the money? This is a question I've actually asked myself a lot over the years when I've been playing against my friends, so I'm making this video also to satisfy my own curiosity in a way. And yes, I'm making an Advanced Wars theory crafting video in 2020. I know, I'm kinda surprised myself. Now, when it comes to most units in Advanced Wars, they are fairly straightforward. Most of them have a clear, defined role. You build anti-air in response to enemy air units. You get artillery and rockets for zoning out enemies in areas you wish to control. Recons are necessary for scouting and harassing enemy infantry, and tanks are the meat and bulk of your army. In any given situation, it makes sense to deploy the various units depending on what you're looking for. Neotanks, however, are different, in that they basically are just medium tanks, but stronger. They do the same thing as they do, just a little bit better, but for a considerably higher price. But unlike regular tanks, who cannot safely go up against medium tanks without getting wiped out, medium tanks can actually fight sort of decently against Neotanks, considering their price difference. At least if they get the first strike. So the question here is really, is it even worth it to build Neotanks over medium tanks if you can afford them? Is the extra cost worth the extra power? Well, that's what we will be taking a look at in today's video. In order to get answers to our questions, the first thing we need to do is to take a look at the two units side by side and see how they measure up against each other. In terms of price, Neotanks will cost you 22,000 compared to the medium tanks 16. That's 6,000 extra. For the same price of a Neotank, you can get a medium tank and an artillery, or even 3 regular tanks and 1 infantry. It is also the same price as that of a bomber, a considerable investment in any match. While Neotanks and medium tanks fill the same role as heavy frontline assault troops, they do have some key differences. They have the same vision range and fog of war, but Neotanks have 1 extra movement, making them as fast as regular tanks. Despite their appearance, Neotanks move on treads, not tires, so they pay the same movement cost over rough terrain as medium tanks do. Neotanks also have 9 shots compared to the medium tanks 8, and 99 fuel over the medium tanks 50, so they can last a lot longer on the front lines before requiring an APC. These small differences aside though, it is the firepower differences that people are interested in. On average, Neotanks will do about 20% more damage compared to the medium tank. And I should specify that I don't mean a 20% increase in firepower on a percentage scale, but rather the damage value that displays when they attack something. When medium tanks do around 55% damage, Neotanks tend to do 75%, and so forth. Meaning that you can roughly expect a Neotank to do around 2 HP more damage to a unit compared to its smaller cousin. If Neotanks get the first strike against medium tanks, they absolutely demolish them, dealing 75% damage and taking very little back. Neotanks can also one-shot regular tanks, APCs, artillery, rockets, and anti-air as long as what they are attacking is located on either a road, shoal, or plain. Neotanks also for the most part one-shot infantry and mechs as long as they are on light terrain. They cannot, however, one-shot infantry that are currently on a property, so they're not capable of instantly interrupting a cap on their own unless you have a small firepower boost. Overall, Neotanks pretty much dominate any ground unit, which you'd expect them to do at that price. But firepower isn't everything that dictates a unit's usefulness, so let's take a look at the Neotanks' defenses. And here is where things get a little bleaker for them. Against artillery and rockets, Neotanks only take slightly less damage at 40% from artillery versus the medium tanks 45%, and 50% from rockets versus the medium tanks 55%. Considering the extra money you're paying, I would expect the Neotanks to be slightly more durable, but they are practically identical to medium tanks in this regard. It's the same deal with bombers and battlecopters, around 5% less damage taken overall, which means that Neotanks will often be focus fired by any unit that can reliably deal with it, seeing as they die practically as easy as a medium tank worth much less, which makes them very juicy targets for your opponents. So far, it seems like Neotanks are a bit overpriced for what they can do. Their firepower is good, but their defenses are lacking. But what about COs that specializes in tank warfare, like say Jess? Does she utilize Neotanks better because she's a tank-focused CO? Well, I'd argue that she doesn't, because the Neotanks have such massive base firepower that boosting it further is often pointless. When Jess uses Overdrive, her Neotanks do 112% damage against other medium tanks. Sure, this means that she can kill them, even on planes, but more often than not, it just results in complete overkill. And while it is hilarious to see damage values like this on your screen, it's not exactly very efficient. In regards to firepower, anything above 100% is often too much. Jess also really doesn't care about the Neotank's extra fuel and ammo reserves, as her CO power fully resupplies all units on the map. Now this principle also applies to other high firepower COs like Max and Kambai. Kambai in particular really does not want to deploy Neotanks, as he already struggles to afford his units, and his medium tanks can go up against Neotanks with little difficulty anyway. COs that can deal global map damage, like Olaf, Drake or Hawk, also severely cripple Neotanks and other expensive units, as the 2 HP their power can drain will result in a net loss of 4,400 funds per Neotank it hits. If you additionally have them standing on bases or cities when the power hits, this will really put a damper on your income, as you'll be forced to spend a lot of money on repairs. Against luck-based COs like Nell or Flak, it makes even less sense to deploy Neotanks, as luck damage does not discriminate. When their power or superpower hits, you can bet that they will send their infantry towards your Neotanks, trying to score that valuable one-hit KO, taking out a unit worth 22,000 with one of their own worth 1,000. Now that is some crazy cost efficiency. If there are one type of COs that can utilize Neotanks well, it is probably those that lower deployment costs, like Colin or Hachi. When playing COs that rely on spamming cheap units, you often find yourself needing more bases to deploy ground units with. Colin in particular can really overwhelm you with a swarm of fodder, as he utilizes Neotanks really well in this regard, as they don't suffer the reduced defense, but still hits pretty hard, despite their 10% reduction in firepower. Lastly, Andy does deserve a small mention here, as his repair-based powers go up in value with very expensive units on the field. If you have, say, 3 damaged Neotanks on the map when you pop Hyper Upgrade, that's essentially 33,000 funds you're getting back. I could see myself investing into some Neotanks as Andy if I know I'll be able to keep them alive until I get my superpower out, but it is quite the gamble, as we have already established that their survivability isn't really that much higher compared to that of medium tanks. Before we reach a verdict, however, let's talk briefly about Dual Strike, as this video has been mostly focused on Advanced Wars 2. Is there anything in Dual Strike that could make Neotanks more worthwhile? Well, first off, their damage values are completely unchanged between the two games. They do the same damage and take the same damage in Dual Strike as they do in Advanced Wars. But how do they measure up against the new titan on the battlefield, that is, the Megatank? Well, just like pretty much everything else, they get utterly demolished. The Megatank has a base 115% firepower against Neotanks, so if you're dumb enough to place one in range, they will get absolutely wiped out. If Neotanks get the first strike on the Megatank, they deal 35% damage, which is higher than any other ground unit, but still not enough to prevent them from getting demolished on the counterattack. Against Megatanks, you really just do not want to engage them willingly with any other direct units, aside from bombers and stealth fighters. You either counter a Megatank with a Megatank of your own, or you pepper them with rockets and artillery until they start losing their bite. Or you could hope that your opponent isn't smart enough to field an APC, resulting in the Megatank running out of fuel or ammo. Either way, Neotanks are not a good counter to Megatanks, so stay away from them. There is also another unit that can adversely affect the Neotanks, and that is the Black Bomb. And the Black Bomb doesn't really care what unit it hits, it simply drains 5 HP from all units in a large area. While I don't personally see a lot of Black Bombs being used in my multiplayer matches, as they are extremely expensive investments, they do discourage you from building very expensive units, as that makes them very cost effective. Another point in favor of getting medium tanks over Neotanks. And then there's the inclusion of a bunch of new COs that also counter Neotanks. Rachel with her luck-based power and superpower that fires missiles, Von Bolt with his Ex Machina, Jugger, who acts much the same way as Flak does, being able to wipe out Neotanks with cheap fodder, and maybe worst of all is Candy, who uses Urban Blight to severely sap your income if you deploy Neotanks the same turn she uses it. Overall, Dual Strike just doesn't treat Neotanks very nicely. I'd actually make the case for them being worse here than in Advanced Wars 2. So let's summarize. For 6,000 more funds, which is a 37.5% increase, you get a unit that's slightly more mobile, that deals around 20% more damage and takes 5% less damage from most sources. that's not a very good deal in my opinion. Now, I'm not going to undersell the value of one extra movement, and the extra fuel and ammo can be valuable in prolonged fights, but overall I find that the Neotank is pretty overpriced for what they can do. They might be good in very specific scenarios, where you need to break through a heavily defended choke point to get to the squishy units in the back. But otherwise, I would pretty much just stick with medium tanks, as they give you a much better deal for a much lower price. They may not hit as hard, but they take about the same punishment, and you can statistically get a lot more of them out in a fight, so they're just a better deal overall. That doesn't mean you should never build a Neotank, it's just that medium tanks are statistically more cost effective, making them better units. So yeah, the verdict is no, Neotanks are not worth it, at least not most of the time. Do you agree? Let me hear your opinions in the comments below. If you'd give this video a like and a comment, I know the Advanced Wars fans on my channel would certainly appreciate it. Anyway, my name is Manx, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!